Long before humans understood fire, they understood something simpler, the thin gray thread rising above it. Smoke was there from the very first spark, curling upward from acacia branches on the African savanna, and it announced itself immediately through discomfort. A shifting breeze, a face too close to the flame, watering eyes, and a sharp cough. This was humanity's first lesson about smoke, delivered not through language but through irritation, learned again and again around countless early fires. Inside rock shelters, that lesson became urgent. Smoke trapped beneath a low stone ceiling filled the air with a choking haze, forcing early humans toward one of their first deliberate architectural decisions: move the fire closer to the opening. Ceilings blackened with soot over generations, leaving a permanent signature on cave walls that archaeologists will study hundreds of thousands of years later. A child's curious fingerprint pressed into that soft carbon residue remains, in its own way, one of humanity's oldest surviving records. But smoke was never merely a nuisance to be managed. It was also remarkably useful. Early humans discovered that meat suspended above a smoldering fire, rather than roasted directly over flame, lasted far longer and tasted noticeably different. An early and accidental invention of food preservation through smoking. They discovered that thick smoke from damp leaves kept biting insects at bay during vulnerable evening hours. They learned to wrap a glowing ember in bark and moss, carrying a thin trailing plume of smoke across considerable distances, preserving fire itself during long migrations, rather than starting from nothing at each new campsite. Then came something larger. A distant lightning strike could ignite an entire grassland, sending a column of smoke into the sky visible 4 miles, a spectacle far beyond any human-controlled flame. Early humans who witnessed these towering columns learned an important cognitive lesson. Smoke, visible from considerable distance, reliably indicated something significant happening somewhere else. A scout spotting an unfamiliar plume on a distant hillside would approach cautiously, driven by instinct to investigate. Sometimes that investigation led to conflict. Sometimes it led to contact between separate human groups who might otherwise have never met. This unintentional visibility, smoke announcing a group's presence to anyone watching from afar, planted a seed. An elder, gesturing toward his own rising smoke, while explaining to a younger listener how it had revealed their location to a recent visitor, began to grasp something profound. If smoke could reveal a location without meaning to, perhaps it could be made to reveal something more, deliberately. Command. By dusk, across an entire ancient valley, countless separate campfires released their columns into a darkening sky, each one a quiet, unintentional signal. Humanity's long, complicated relationship with this rising vapor had only just begun. Soon, this same smoke would carry something entirely different: humanity's first prayers toward the heavens. In temple after temple, across civilizations that never once made contact with one another, humanity arrived at a strikingly similar conclusion. Rising smoke could carry something more than warmth. It could carry a message toward the divine. In ancient Egypt, priests burned carefully prepared resins within bronze censers, watching fragrant smoke drift upward past painted images of the gods, believing this rising vapor formed a literal bridge between mortal worshippers and powers far beyond the temple walls. The elaborate Kifi blend, ground painstakingly from herbs, honey, and precious resin, existed for one purpose alone: to make that bridge as beautiful and worthy as possible. In Mesopotamia, priests atop towering ziggurats studied the shifting patterns of sacrificial smoke with genuine scholarly seriousness, a practice known as libanomancy. A rightward drift might mean a favorable harvest. A sudden gust might mean something else entirely. This was not superstition dismissed lightly. It was, for its practitioners, a genuine science of interpretation. Smoke, treated as a legitimate channel of divine communication, worth studying and debating. In China, incense sticks placed before ancestral shrines maintained quiet, continuous connection between living families and departed relatives. In India, Vedic priests poured clarified butter onto sacred fires, their chanted verses rising alongside fragrant golden smoke believed to carry offerings directly to presiding deities. Across the Great Plains of North America, a ceremonial pipe passed respectfully around a seated circle, each participant exhaling skyward with quiet reverence, tobacco smoke binding a community together through shared, sacred breath. At Delphi, in ancient Greece, a priestess descended into a chamber where mysterious vapors rose from a crack in the stone floor, breathing them slowly until she entered a trance believed to grant prophetic vision. In Rome, families lit small offerings before household shrines, an intimate, everyday devotion, entirely separate from grand public temples. And at funerals across numerous ancient cultures, smoke rising from a pyre was read as a soul's literal departure, carried upward and away from its earthly remains. This pattern did not stop with antiquity. Medieval cathedrals filled with incense swung from suspended censers, the smoke catching colored light through stained glass in a tradition unbroken from ancient temple practice. Buddhist monks today still light incense before ornate altars, exactly as their predecessors did centuries earlier. Why did so many separate societies, without contact, without shared language, arrive at the same conclusion about the same rising vapor? Perhaps because smoke does something no other visible substance does. It disappears upward, out of sight, toward something we can never quite reach. Soon, this same instinct toward reaching beyond ourselves would be turned toward something entirely practical, reaching another human being across a distance no voice could cross. Along the mountainous frontier of ancient China, watchtowers rose at carefully calculated intervals, each one positioned within clear sight of its neighbor. This was the Great Wall's beacon system, and it turned smoke from an accidental signal into deliberate infrastructure. A soldier spotting enemy movement would ignite a prepared mixture of wolf dung and dry straw, chosen specifically for its thick, unmistakable smoke, and within minutes the warning would leap from tower to tower, covering in hours what a mounted messenger might take days to travel. That system carried a hard lesson within it. According to legend, a Zhou dynasty king lit the beacons falsely, simply to amuse a favorite consort, by watching nobles rush anxiously to a threat that did not exist. When a genuine invasion came later, the same beacons were lit in earnest, and the nobles, having learned not to trust the signal, hesitated. It is a story, whether entirely factual or partly legend, that captures something true about every communication system ever built. Its value depends entirely on trust, and trust, once broken, is not easily rebuilt. On the Great Plains of North America, indigenous nations developed something considerably more sophisticated than a simple warning fire. A blanket draped over flames and pulled away sharply could produce a distinct, isolated puff of smoke, and a skilled signaler could send a specific sequence of puffs carrying real, coded meaning across considerable distance. Different fuels produce different colors, adding yet another layer of nuance. This was not primitive signaling. It was a functioning visual language, developed entirely independently of anything happening in Asia or Europe. Ancient Persia built its own network of desert watchtowers to relay royal messages across an empire spanning thousands of miles. Ancient Greek writers described chained beacon fires, carrying news of Troy's fall across the Aegean islands toward the mainland, a legendary account still remembered for capturing fire and smoke's power to compress vast distance into a single, shared moment of knowledge. Rome maintained its own frontier network, smoke by day, flame by night. Ships at sea used smoke to signal one another across open water. In Australia, Aboriginal communities maintain smoke signaling traditions for tens of thousands of years, integrated seamlessly with deliberate land management through controlled burning. Separated by oceans, unaware of one another's existence, these civilizations kept arriving at the same solution, using nothing but fire and rising vapor. It is, in a real sense, humanity's first long-distance communication technology, the direct conceptual ancestor of telegraph relay stations, and eventually the interconnected networks carrying our messages today. Having learned to speak across mountains and oceans, humanity now turned this same smoke toward an entirely different task, forging the very metal and material that would build civilization's physical foundation. If smoke had proven itself as a messenger, it was about to prove itself as a builder. In ancient Anatolia, craftsmen packed charcoal into small clay furnaces, thick smoke rising as raw copper gradually transformed into glowing liquid metal. It was slow, acrid, physically demanding work, but it represented one of humanity's most consequential technological leaps, extracting workable metal directly from unremarkable stone through nothing but controlled, smoky fire. When Bronze Age craftsmen learned to combine copper with tin, they needed even hotter, smokier furnaces, and the invention of the bellows, forcing extra air directly into the flame, let them achieve temperatures previously unreachable. Iron brought this relationship to a new intensity. Blacksmiths hammered glowing metal against stone anvils while charcoal forges burned continuously beside them, smoke a permanent fixture of every workshop. Apprentices learned the same hard lesson their prehistoric ancestors had learned around cave fires. Manage the smoke, or the workshop becomes unbearable. Proper ventilation was not a luxury. It was the difference between a functioning forge and a choking one. Pottery kilns told the same story in clay rather than metal. Sealed chambers released smoke through carefully placed vents, while potters monitored the fire's intensity, transforming fragile unbaked clay into durable vessels essential to daily ancient life. Glassmakers did something remarkably similar, tending furnaces hot enough to melt silica sand into glowing liquid glass, glass blowers shaping the molten material, while standing directly beside billowing smoke. Roman engineers even found a way to separate smoke's heat from its discomfort, channeling warm smoke through underground clay passages beneath bathhouse floors, an ingenious hypocaust system that heated entire buildings without ever letting smoke enter the rooms people actually occupied. Across medieval Europe, this relationship deepened further. Charcoal burners worked alone in forests, carefully managing smoldering earth-covered wood mounds to produce the concentrated fuel blacksmiths needed. Gloomery furnaces turned raw ore into iron across long, smoky days. Lime kilns and brickworks supplied the materials rebuilding medieval towns. In Scotland, malted barley dried over smoldering peat fires, smoke seeping directly into the grain and creating a distinctive flavor still prized in whiskey centuries later. Japanese swordsmiths folded glowing steel again and again within smoky forges, producing blades renowned for both function and beauty. An aging blacksmith, resting beside his cooling forge at day's end, might have recognized something worth pausing over. Smoke had been humanity's earliest fear, choking and irritating, and yet it had become humanity's most essential creative partner, present at the forging of nearly every tool, vessel, and structure defining early civilization. Soon, ships would arrive carrying something entirely new from across the ocean, a bundle of dried leaves that would give smoke an entirely different, deeply personal relationship with the human body. Tobacco existed nowhere on Earth except the Americas, cultivated 4 generations by indigenous farmers who understood it as considerably more than a simple crop. Maya priests exhaled thick ceremonial smoke skyward during sacred rituals, believing it carried prayer toward powerful ancestral spirits. Traditional healers blew concentrated tobacco smoke over ailing patients, convinced of its power to draw out illness. This was a plant woven deeply into spiritual, medicinal, and social life, long before any European had ever encountered it. That changed in October of 1492, when Columbus's sailors watched local Tano inhabitants smoke rolled tobacco leaves with calm, practiced familiarity, an encounter so foreign to European experience that the sailors could barely process what they were witnessing. Years later, back in Spain, A returning sailor named Rodrigo de Jerez calmly smoked outside his own home, and neighbors were so alarmed by smoke apparently emerging voluntarily from a living man that local religious authorities reportedly imprisoned him, suspecting demonic influence. It is a striking historical footnote. The same act millions would soon consider ordinary once triggered genuine fear. Tobacco's rehabilitation in European eyes came through medicine. French diplomat Jean Nicot introduced it to the French court as a treatment for headaches and various common ailments, and his name would eventually attach itself permanently to the plant's active compound, nicotine. From there, tobacco moved swiftly from medicinal curiosity to fashionable habit, filling aristocratic drawing rooms and crowded London coffee houses alike. Not everyone approved. King James I personally authored a treatise condemning the habit as dangerous and corrupting, one of history's earliest documented public health warnings, though it did remarkably little to slow tobacco's rising popularity. In Virginia, colonist John Rolfe's successful cultivation of a milder tobacco variety transformed a struggling settlement into an economically viable colony, and tobacco soon became colonial America's defining cash crop. Its explosive commercial growth, uncompensated labor of enslaved Africans working under brutal conditions, a deeply troubling reality inseparable from tobacco's economic rise. Ships crossed the Atlantic continuously, carrying tobacco toward an increasingly hungry European market. From there, the plant's spread became remarkable in its speed and reach. Ottoman coffee houses adopted elaborate water pipes, bubbling smoke through scented water in a distinctly regional tradition. Chinese and Japanese cultures each developed their own smoking implements and rituals. European aristocrats who preferred to avoid inhaling smoke altogether took up snuff instead, tapping powdered tobacco directly into the nose with theatrical flair. In Cuba, skilled artisans rolled premium leaves into cigars that would soon become internationally renowned. Within barely centuries of first contact, a plant unknown outside the Americas had reached nearly every inhabited continent on Earth, hand-rolled one leaf at a time. That patient, limited pace was about to end entirely. Rolling cigarettes by hand had always imposed a natural limit on how widely tobacco could spread, no matter how popular it became. That limit disappeared in 1880, when young inventor James Bonsack completed a mechanical device capable of forming cigarettes at a pace no human hand could ever match. Entrepreneur James Buchanan Duke recognized the machine's enormous commercial potential immediately, and within years, factory floors lined with Bonsack machines were producing cigarettes by the hundreds of thousands, transforming a limited artisanal product into an affordable, endlessly available commodity accessible to virtually every social class. War accelerated everything that followed. In the trenches of the First World War, cigarettes distributed as standard rations offered soldiers a brief, reliable comfort amid overwhelming chaos, and countless young men returned home with a habit formed under the psychological pressures of combat. Tobacco companies recognized the opportunity clearly, coordinating massive wartime cigarette shipments that doubled as long-term customer cultivation. The Second World War repeated the pattern for an entire additional generation. Peacetime brought its own transformation, this one built through mass media. Radio announcers delivered polished sponsor messages into millions of households. Television commercials went further still, sometimes even featuring actors dressed as physicians, reassuring viewers about a particular brand's supposedly gentler qualities, a remarkable early example of marketing borrowing medical authority to obscure emerging concern rather than address it. Honestly, Hollywood did its part too, framing a cigarette's elegant gesture as an essential piece of sophisticated on-screen charisma. Its drifting smoke lit deliberately to enhance a film's visual atmosphere. Marketing reached new levels of calculation in 1929, when a coordinated group of fashionable young women marched down New York's Fifth Avenue during the Easter Parade. each smoking cigarettes as a staged publicity stunt cynically branded torches of freedom. Framed as a bold statement of women's independence, it was, in truth, a calculated effort to open an enormous new market, and it worked spectacularly. Cigarette brands soon expanded across international borders as well, factories multiplying overseas, while tobacco farming became an entire region's economic backbone, and government tax revenue climbed alongside soaring consumption. By the 1950s, cigarette smoking had reached a genuine cultural peak, more widespread than at any point before or since. But quietly, in hospital wards, a handful of physicians had begun noticing something troubling, a pattern of lung disease appearing with unusual, growing frequency among their heaviest smoking patients. It was still preliminary. It was still cautious. But the same billboard advertising a glamorous brand now stood, unknowingly, just blocks away from doctors beginning to ask uncomfortable questions the industry was not yet prepared to answer. While cigarette smoke was becoming a personal habit, an entirely different kind of smoke was reshaping the physical world itself. Coal, abundant and energy-dense, powered the steam engines that launched the Industrial Revolution, and every improvement to that engine's efficiency, from early prototypes through James Watt's refined designs, meant burning coal faster and producing smoke in correspondingly greater volume. Factory chimneys grew taller, engineers reasoning that height alone might disperse the smoke away from crowded streets below. It was a modest solution to an enormous, rapidly growing problem. Manchester's textile district came to exemplify the change entirely, an urban skyline transformed by countless simultaneous chimneys, thick black smoke staining an already overcast sky into a persistent gray canopy. Inside the mills, workers labored, through hazy air drifting from nearby steam machinery. Steam locomotives carried smoke trails across the countryside, occasionally drifting soot directly into open passenger carriages. And in London, coal smoke combined with natural river fog to produce something distinctly new, a dense, yellowish urban haze so thick that gas street lamps could barely illuminate more than a few feet ahead, later known, with grim familiarity, as London Particular. Physicians began noticing a troubling pattern among city residents, rising rates of chronic breathing difficulty that seemed to track closely with the city's worsening air. Reformers pushed for legislative protection, addressing smoke exposure alongside considerably wider concerns about child labor and harsh factory conditions. Smoke nuisance laws followed, though officials candidly acknowledged how difficult genuine enforcement proved against deeply entrenched industrial practice. Meanwhile, the same pattern repeated itself across the ocean, Pittsburgh's steel mills staining American skies in ways strikingly similar to Manchester's. Then, in December of 1952, London experienced something no city had ever fully anticipated. Unusually cold weather drove residents to burn considerably more coal than usual, and an unusual atmospheric temperature inversion trapped the resulting smoke directly at street level, with no wind whatsoever to disperse it. Over several devastating days, the city descended into a smog so thick that pedestrians navigated almost entirely by memory and touch. Hospitals filled far beyond capacity with patients in severe respiratory distress. When officials finally reviewed the aftermath, the documented death toll proved dramatically higher than anyone had initially estimated. That tragedy produced genuine, lasting change. Parliament passed the Clean Air Act, finally treating coal smoke's regulation as a matter of serious, scientifically grounded public health necessity rather than mere inconvenience. It had taken nearly 2 centuries, from Watt's first efficient engine to the Great Smog's devastating aftermath, for society to fully reckon with what industrial smoke actually cost. And having reshaped cities and claimed thousands of lives, this mysterious substance was finally about to be studied properly under laboratory conditions to determine exactly what it was. After countless millennia of practical use, smoke finally faced genuine scientific scrutiny. 19th-century chemists began collecting samples for careful analysis, and early microscopes revealed something previously invisible. Smoke was not a single substance at all, but countless tiny solid particles, irregular clusters of carbon, suspended within a mixture of gases. Careful chemical testing identified those gases individually, including carbon dioxide, water vapor, and various other combustion byproducts, transforming smoke from a vague, mysterious haze into a precisely characterized chemical mixture. Chemistry lectures could now explain plainly why smoke formed at all. Incomplete combustion, occurring whenever insufficient oxygen reached burning fuel, left behind burned carbon particles as visible smoke. A simple side-by-side demonstration. One candle burning cleanly and another deliberately starved of air producing thick, dark smoke, made the underlying principle unmistakable. Perhaps most significantly, researchers identified carbon monoxide within smoke, an entirely invisible, odorless, genuinely lethal gas, whose presence finally explained countless previously mysterious deaths among miners and others, working in poorly ventilated spaces throughout history. Physicist John Tyndall demonstrated something equally important about smoke's very appearance, directing a focused beam of light through a chamber filled with suspended particles, and watching the beam become strikingly visible as it scattered off countless microscopic surfaces. This elegant experiment, now known as the Tyndall effect, finally explains scientifically why smoke looks the way it does, a phenomenon humanity had observed for hundreds of thousands of years without ever understanding its underlying physics. Later researchers extended this understanding considerably further. Fluid dynamics studies explain smoke's chaotic, swirling movement through rigorous mathematical modeling rather than mysterious unpredictability. Meteorologists learned to track how smoke particles travel across vast distances according to prevailing wind patterns, a capability dramatically expanded through modern satellite imagery capable of following a single wildfire's plume across an entire continent. Electron microscopes revealed smoke particles at magnifications entirely unimaginable throughout most of human history, while environmental scientists learned to classify particles by precise microscopic size, distinguishing those large enough to see from far smaller, far more hazardous particulates, capable of penetrating deep into human lungs. This growing scientific understanding found genuinely practical application. Forensic investigators learned to read smoke and burn patterns as reliable physical evidence, determining a fire's exact point of origin with scientific confidence. Toxicologists identified dangerous compounds like hydrogen cyanide released when modern synthetic materials burn, revealing that smoke's danger profile continues evolving alongside the materials filling our modern homes. Contemporary air quality monitors now measure smoke and pollution levels continuously, translating centuries of accumulated scientific understanding into simple, color-coded information protecting ordinary people's daily health decisions. Having finally defined what smoke actually is, science was ready to confront its most personal and consequential question yet, precisely what this substance does to the human body itself. Long before smoke became medicine's most studied adversary, it was considered genuine medicine. Ancient Mesopotamian physicians burned specific herbs to treat respiratory complaints. Ayurvedic tradition prescribed therapeutic smoke inhalation for chronic coughing. That belief persisted remarkably far into the modern era. 19th-century American pharmacies sold commercially manufactured asthma cigarettes, sincerely marketed and sincerely purchased as legitimate respiratory treatment. It would take considerably more rigorous science to finally overturn centuries of genuine, if ultimately mistaken, medical conviction. That reckoning began quietly. Early 20th century physicians noticed a troubling pattern within their own patient records, heavy smokers appearing disproportionately among diagnoses of a previously uncommon lung disease. In 1950, British researchers Richard Doll and Austin Bradford Hill designed a rigorous study comparing smoking histories between lung cancer patients and a matched comparison group, and the resulting statistical correlation proved unmistakably strong. A year later, they launched an even more ambitious effort, tracking tens of thousands of British physicians across many subsequent years according to their personal smoking habits. The results, once finally compiled, left no reasonable room for doubt. In January of 1964, the United States Surgeon General formally announced these findings to a crowded press conference, a moment that instantly transformed smoking from casual cultural habit into an officially acknowledged, scientifically documented public health hazard. American households watched the news with genuinely mixed reactions, concern colliding with decades of cultural normalization. Behind closed doors, tobacco executives reviewed the same damaging evidence, privately understanding its validity, while publicly working to delay the reckoning, already well underway. Change followed steadily, rather than instantly. Warning labels appeared on cigarette packaging by federal mandate. Broadcast advertising restrictions followed, removing cigarettes from television and radio entirely. Public health campaigns pushed back directly against decades of glamorous marketing. Researchers extended their investigation towards secondhand smoke, establishing that even non-smokers face genuine measurable health risks from others' exposure nearby, evidence that would soon justify smoke-free legislation covering restaurants, workplaces, and countless other shared public spaces. Smoking rates, having peaked at historic highs mid-century, began a steady, genuinely encouraging decline that has continued across subsequent decades. Even today, smoke has not entirely left medicine behind. Traditional moxibustion, burning dried mugwort near the skin, continues within certain complementary healing traditions, and in modern burn units, physicians treat smoke inhalation injury using sophisticated respiratory support technology entirely unavailable throughout most of human history, applying decades of accumulated scientific understanding to genuinely save lives. Smoke's medical story traces a complete, remarkable arc, from sincere ancient treatment through cultural celebration toward rigorously documented danger, and finally toward genuinely sophisticated modern medical management. That same substance was about to reveal an entirely different face, one found not in hospitals, but on the battlefield. Warfare discovered smoke's value early, and not always for concealment. Besieging armies sometimes lit massive fires deliberately, sending intimidating columns skyward, as a psychological display of destructive capability aimed at defenders watching from behind city walls. Naval battles under sail found a subtler use, gunpowder smoke drifting across the water offering incidental cover that captains soon learned to exploit deliberately, maneuvering ships to remain hidden within their own battle haze. The First World War transformed this incidental advantage into deliberate engineering. Specialized smoke shells, fired ahead of advancing infantry, created protective screens that let soldiers cross deadly, exposed ground with meaningfully reduced risk from enemy machine gun fire. Smoke grenades offered a faster, more portable version of the same protection. At sea, small, agile destroyers laid smoke screens, specifically to shield larger, more valuable battleships from targeting, accepting greater personal exposure to protect their fleet's most critical assets. The Second World War expanded smoke's tactical role dramatically. Entire cities generated artificial smoke screens overnight, concealing critical industrial targets from bomber crews searching the darkness above, a defensive measure that likely saved considerable civilian life throughout the sustained aerial campaigns. Atlantic convoys used smoke to shield vulnerable merchant ships from lurking submarines, and during history's largest amphibious invasion, landing craft approached heavily defended beaches beneath protective smoke cover, soldiers moving through reduced visibility during the most dangerous minutes of their entire mission. Veterans who survived those landings still recall, decades later, the smoke that once shielded them, military smoke technology continued evolving well beyond wartime necessity. Modern soldiers now use brightly colored smoke primarily for signaling, marking helicopter landing zones with unmistakable visual clarity, echoing humanity's ancient smoke signaling traditions in genuinely updated technological form. Research laboratories continue developing increasingly sophisticated synthetic obscurants, refining humanity's oldest defensive concealment technology through considerably more advanced modern science. That same technology found peaceful, genuinely valuable civilian purpose as well. Firefighter training facilities now use controlled smoke machines to simulate realistic, low-visibility emergency conditions, preparing rescue personnel for genuine structure fires in a safely managed setting. Film productions and concert venues borrowed the same equipment purely for dramatic visual effect, smoke technology traveling remarkably far from its military origins into pure entertainment. A historian examining this complete arc might reasonably conclude that smoke's military legacy remains genuinely dual in nature, simultaneously protective and destructive, shielding soldiers on beaches while marking targets from above, present at both the saving and the taking of countless lives. Throughout modern military history, it was time for smoke to meet its most important adversary yet, a small, tireless device built specifically to detect it before it could cause harm at all. Smoke detection technology began, fittingly, with an accident. In the 1930s, Swiss physicist Walter Jaeger, researching poison gas detection, noticed that cigarette smoke inexplicably interfered with his sensitive measuring equipment. Rather than dismiss the anomaly, he investigated it, and that curious observation quietly laid groundwork for what would eventually become the ionization smoke detector. Decades of subsequent refinement transformed the technology from bulky laboratory equipment into something genuinely affordable, compact enough for installation in any ordinary home. By the 1970s, factories produced smoke detectors at genuine mass scale, and public safety campaigns encouraged widespread household adoption. Families installed devices on hallway ceilings, tested their alarms together, and discussed evacuation plans should the warning tone ever sound for real. Fire departments held community demonstrations reinforcing the message. Schools taught children to crawl low beneath accumulated smoke layers during evacuation drills, a simple technique with genuine life-saving potential, ensuring fire safety knowledge passed successfully to the next generation. The technology itself grew increasingly sophisticated. Ionization detectors responded quickly to fast, flaming fires, while photoelectric detectors proved more sensitive to slow, smoldering conditions, and modern dual sensor devices eventually combined both approaches for genuinely comprehensive protection. Entire buildings adopted interconnected alarm systems, ensuring a single detector's activation would sound throughout an entire structure, regardless of where a fire actually started, often integrated directly with automatic sprinkler suppression systems for coordinated, immediate response. Firefighting itself transformed alongside detection technology. Thermal imaging cameras finally let firefighters see clearly through smoke that would otherwise render a burning building completely impenetrable, detecting heat signatures rather than relying on visible light, and locating trapped occupants in conditions that would previously have made rescue essentially impossible. Self-contained breathing apparatus, refined across decades of engineering development, finally let firefighters work safely within smoke that had once posed a serious, unavoidable occupational hazard. Forensic laboratories learned to extract genuinely reliable evidence from smoke residue itself, identifying chemical accelerants that could distinguish accidental fires from deliberate arson within a court of law. This accumulated knowledge reshaped entire cities. Building codes now mandate smoke detection throughout new construction. Skyscrapers incorporate sophisticated smoke management systems engineered specifically to protect evacuation routes. Aircraft carry discrete lavatory smoke sensors, a direct response to documented historical in-flight emergencies. Remote wildfire monitoring networks combine satellite imagery with traditional lookout towers, connecting cutting-edge technology to a watching tradition that stretches back centuries. The statistics tell a genuinely remarkable story. Smoke detector adoption has measurably, dramatically reduced residential fire deaths across recent decades, relatively simple technology quietly saving countless lives each year. Having finally learned to detect and respond to smoke reliably, humanity now faced its largest, most consequential question yet. What does this substance mean for our entire planet's future? Today, smoke operates on scales no ancient observer could have imagined. Massive wildfires, growing measurably more frequent and intense as drought and rising temperatures reshape entire landscapes, send towering columns skyward that satellites now track for thousands of miles, affecting air quality in cities entirely disconnected from any direct fire danger. Climate researchers study smoke's darker atmospheric role too. Dark carbon particles absorbing solar radiation and potentially influencing regional temperature patterns through genuinely complex feedback mechanisms. Scientists are still working to fully understand. Yet smoke's most significant contemporary danger may be its quietest. Across much of the developing world, billions of people still cook daily meals over open indoor fires, filling family kitchens with heavy smoke that disproportionately affects women and children throughout their entire lives. International health organizations now coordinate efforts distributing cleaner cook stove technology, a genuinely meaningful humanitarian response to a health crisis that receives, relative to its actual scale, remarkably little public attention. Meanwhile, dense smog continues blanketing numerous rapidly growing megacities, satellite imagery revealing air pollution as a genuinely global urban challenge rather than any single nation's isolated problem. There are hopeful signs of change as well. Aging coal-fired power plants are being decommissioned in favor of solar and wind installations that generate substantial electricity while producing no smoke whatsoever, a meaningful technological shift after centuries of combustion-dependent energy. And even as humanity works to reduce smoke's harmful presence, its deeper cultural and emotional significance endures largely unchanged. Indigenous communities continue traditional smudging ceremonies. Buddhist worshippers still light incense before ancient altars. Families still gather around campfires. Children still cough when smoke drifts unexpectedly into their faces, experiencing precisely the same reaction shared by early humans hundreds of thousands of years earlier. That continuity is worth sitting with. From a prehistoric campfire's rising column to a contemporary atmospheric research laboratory's sophisticated analysis equipment, smoke has remained a constant, evolving companion throughout every stage of human development. Our earliest fears, our oldest prayers, our first long-distance language, our foundational industries, our most beloved and most dangerous personal habit, our battlefields, our life-saving safety technology, and now our shared planetary future. It has been humanity's messenger, our medicine, our weapon, our warning system, and our ritual, sometimes all within a single human lifetime. Perhaps that is smoke's truest legacy. It has never simply been a byproduct of fire. It has been a faithful, honest record of exactly what we were doing at any given moment in our long history, rising quietly above every campfire, every temple, every factory, and every battlefield we have ever built. Tonight, somewhere, a simple fire still burns, and its thin gray thread still rises steadily to an evening sky, carrying forward a story as old as humanity itself.